Jessica Taylor's red Ford pickup was last seen leaving a rodeo in Payne County, Oklahoma, on the night of May 12, 2011. The plains were bathed in a crisp spring evening, the surrounding farmland stretching endlessly under the bright stars. At 11:32 p.m., Jessica's phone received a call from a familiar number. By sunrise, her roommate reported her missing, when neither she nor her truck returned to their shared apartment. Hundreds of posters featuring the 23-year-old nursing student's face were plastered across Stillwater, Perkins, and Cushing, but they led nowhere. What truly happened after Jessica left the rodeo has haunted Payne County for over a decade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. On the night of May 12, 2011, in Stillwater, Oklahoma, the name Jessica Taylor became tied to a mystery that the Payne County community would never forget. Jessica, just 23, was a second-year nursing student at Oklahoma State University, bright, compassionate, and driven. She was the middle child of the Taylor family, who owned a modest ranch house on the eastern outskirts of town. Everyone who knew Jessica described her as a natural caregiver. Her instructors praised her dedication. Her friends relied on her steady presence, and her family took pride in her determination to overcome financial struggles to pursue her education. That evening, Jessica wore a turquoise blouse she'd saved up for weeks to buy, paired with her favorite worn jeans, as she drove her cherry-red Ford F-150 with the license plate OK235DRV to the annual spring rodeo in Payne County, about a 25-minute drive from Stillwater. The event took place at the county fairgrounds, where string lights hung between wooden posts cast a warm glow over the dusty arena. The smell of barbecue and hay filled the air as country music played from speakers mounted on the announcer's booth. Jessica wasn't particularly noticeable that night. She was just another face in the crowd of several hundred locals who had gathered to watch the bull riding competition. Friends later recalled seeing her cheering alongside everyone else, occasionally checking her phone, but otherwise simply enjoying the evening. Nothing about her behavior raised any concerns or suggested what was to come. Around 11:15 p.m., as the final event wrapped up, Jessica texted her roommate that she was heading home. A few attendees remembered seeing her walking toward the parking lot, her truck keys jingling in her hand. The red pickup's engine started, headlights cutting through the night as she pulled away from the fairgrounds. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jessica Taylor alive. By morning, her roommate Kate Wilson grew increasingly anxious when Jessica's bed remained untouched. Kate's calls went straight to voicemail, and her texts remained unread. The apartment felt eerily quiet without Jessica's usual morning routine, the sound of her preparing coffee, reviewing notes for class, or humming country songs as she got ready. By noon, Kate couldn't ignore her growing dread any longer. Something was deeply wrong. Kate immediately called Jessica's parents, Michael and Linda Taylor. Within hours, the family had contacted the Payne County Sheriff's Department to report their daughter missing. Michael's voice trembled as he spoke to the dispatcher. "My daughter never came home last night. This isn't like her at all. Something's happened." Without waiting for the official investigation to gain momentum, the Taylors mobilized. Linda hurriedly printed missing person flyers on bright yellow paper from the local copy shop. Jessica's warm smile and confident eyes stood out against the stark text, "Missing, Jessica Taylor, 23 years old, last seen leaving Payne County Rodeo, red Ford F-150 pickup, license plate OK235DRV. The Taylor family, along with Jessica's friends, fellow nursing students, and even her professors, divided into groups to distribute flyers across Stillwater, Perkins, Cushing, and every town within a 50-mile radius. Within days, Jessica's face was everywhere, taped to storefront windows, pinned to community bulletin boards, stapled to telephone poles at busy intersections, even displayed at the campus health center where she completed her clinical rotations. Strangers would glance at the flyers, some pausing with genuine concern, others barely registering yet another sad story before continuing with their day. But the Taylors refused to let their daughter become just another missing person statistic. They maintained a stubborn hope that someone, somewhere, would recognize Jessica or her distinctive red truck. The Payne County Sheriff's Department launched an official investigation, coordinating with the Oklahoma Highway Patrol to review footage from traffic cameras along major routes in and out of the county. But in 2011, surveillance systems were spotty at best, particularly in rural areas. The only substantial lead came from a gas station security camera on the outskirts of Perkins that captured Jessica filling her truck's tank at 11:47 p.m., the last documented evidence of her movements. After that grainy image, all traces vanished. No more cameras picked her up, no witnesses reported an accident, and no one came forward with information. The police were baffled, and the Taylors grew desperate with each passing day. But the community refused to stand idle. Volunteers formed search parties, combing the fields and wooded areas along Jessica's likely route home. Others took boats out to search Stillwater Creek and Lake Carl Blackwell, hoping against hope they wouldn't find her truck submerged beneath the water. Some searched on horseback, covering rough terrain that vehicles couldn't access, while drones, still relatively new technology in 2011, were deployed by a local enthusiast to scan larger areas from above. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Each search day stretched into exhausting nights. The Taylors barely slept, their phones constantly within reach. Every time a call came in, Linda's heart would race with both hope and dread. But it was usually just a friend checking in or a well-meaning stranger reporting a potential sighting that ultimately led nowhere. Each false lead was another emotional roller coaster. A brief surge of hope, followed by crushing disappointment. Local media quickly picked up the story. The Stillwater news press ran daily updates, while Oklahoma City television stations sent reporters to interview the family. The cameras captured Linda Taylor standing on her front porch, her voice breaking as she pleaded, "If anyone has seen Jessica or knows anything about where she might be, please call us or the sheriff's department. We just want our daughter home." The news coverage showed the Taylor family home transformed into an impromptu command center, Jessica's photos covering the walls, maps spread across the dining table marked with search areas, and a constant stream of visitors bringing food, offering support, or volunteering to join the search efforts. For weeks, public interest remained high. Parents warned their daughters not to travel alone at night. University students organized campus safety awareness events, and local businesses contributed funds for larger rewards for information. But as with all media attention, the spotlight eventually began to dim. After a month with no significant developments, Jessica's story gradually moved from the front page to brief mentions inside the local paper. Television coverage became sporadic, then ceased entirely. Other news, a tornado in western Oklahoma, state budget disputes, and a high-profile political scandal pushed Jessica's disappearance further from public consciousness. For most of the community, Jessica Taylor became a cautionary tale, a momentary fear that faded as daily life resumed its normal rhythms. But for the Taylor family, nothing would ever be normal again. They continued distributing flyers, checking in with law enforcement weekly, and keeping Jessica's name alive however they could. Time passed with agonizing slowness, from the initial frantic days of searching to months of dwindling hope. By the one-year mark, Jessica's case had officially been labeled cold by the sheriff's department. The investigation remained open, but active leads had dried up, and resources were reallocated to more recent cases. In the Payne County Sheriff's Office, Jessica's file was placed in a metal cabinet alongside other unsolved cases, a thin folder containing witness statements, search reports, and a timeline that ended abruptly at that gas station in Perkins. A layer of dust slowly gathered on the file, mirroring the community's fading memory of the nursing student who vanished on a spring night. For many Stillwater residents, Jessica Taylor eventually became just a name they vaguely recalled from old news reports. But in the Taylor family home, her memory remained vibrantly alive. Linda Taylor kept Jessica's bedroom exactly as she had left it, nursing textbooks stacked neatly on the desk, a half-used bottle of perfume on the dresser, and her graduation photo from high school prominently displayed. Each morning before heading to work at the local elementary school, Linda would pause at Jessica's door, her hand resting on the frame as she whispered, "We're still looking for you, sweetheart." Michael Taylor, a man of few words even before the tragedy, channeled his grief into action. He maintained a detailed log of every search effort, every call to law enforcement, and every potential lead, no matter how unlikely. On each anniversary of Jessica's disappearance, the Taylors would organize a candlelight vigil at the Oklahoma State University campus. The first year, hundreds attended. By the 5th anniversary, the crowd had dwindled to a few dozen faithful friends and family members. Still, Linda and Michael persisted, refusing to let their daughter be forgotten. Linda wrote regular letters to the sheriff's department, requesting updates and offering to provide additional information if needed. The responses grew increasingly brief over time. No new developments. "We'll notify if situation changes." Some of the original detectives who had waded through creek beds and interviewed dozens of rodeo attendees had moved on, promoted to different positions, transferred to other jurisdictions, or retired from law enforcement altogether. Meanwhile, Payne County continued evolving. New businesses opened, roads were repaved, and fresh crops of students arrived at Oklahoma State University each fall, unaware of the young nursing student who had once walked the same campus paths. Occasional rumors would surface, someone claiming to have seen Jessica in another state, or whispers of her truck being spotted near the Oklahoma-Texas border. But none ever solidified into credible leads. For the Taylors, time didn't heal their wound. It merely changed its shape. The raw, searing pain of the early days transformed into a persistent ache that colored every moment of their lives. Holidays were especially difficult. An empty chair at Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas presents that would never be opened, birthday candles that remained unlit. Linda maintained her own ritual to keep Jessica's memory alive. Every May 12th, she would drive to the fairgrounds where the rodeo had taken place, sit in her car, and try to imagine what might have happened that night. Who did Jessica speak to? What did she see? Where was she planning to go? The questions remained unanswered year after year, swirling in the Oklahoma wind. Michael Taylor dealt with his grief differently. He became obsessed with similar missing persons cases across the state, collecting newspaper clippings and creating detailed timelines. He searched for patterns, connections, anything that might shed light on his daughter's fate. His garage walls became covered with maps marked with pins indicating other disappearances, creating a visual representation of his desperate search for answers. As the years stretched on, fewer people came to the Taylor home to offer support. Friends and relatives, while still caring deeply, didn't know what to say anymore. What comfort could they possibly provide after 5 years? After 7? After 10? The well of sympathetic words had run dry, leaving only the stark reality of Jessica's continued absence. The Payne County Sheriff's Department occasionally revisited the case when new technologies became available. In 2015, they reanalyzed what little physical evidence they had using more advanced techniques, but the results yielded nothing substantial. In 2017, they conducted new interviews with attendees of the 2011 rodeo, hoping that time might have loosened lips or refreshed memories, but again came up empty. For most of the community, Jessica Taylor's disappearance had become a distant memory, a sad footnote in local history. Her story occasionally appeared in retrospective news segments about unsolved Oklahoma mysteries, or was mentioned in true crime podcasts alongside other cold cases. The bright-eyed nursing student who once had such promise had become a statistic, her life reduced to a few sentences in a database of the missing. But in the hearts of those who loved her, Jessica remained vibrantly present. Linda still bought Christmas gifts for her daughter each year, storing them in a closet that grew increasingly crowded. Michael continued updating his investigation board in the garage, refusing to surrender to the passage of time. And Kate Wilson, Jessica's former roommate, now a practicing nurse herself, wore a turquoise ribbon pin on her scrubs every day in memory of her friend. After 10 years, when hope had dwindled to its faintest flicker, fate finally intervened through the most unexpected of channels. The mystery that had haunted Payne County for a decade was about to reveal its first crucial piece, setting in motion a chain of events that would shock the community to its core. It was late June 2021 when a YouTube channel called Midwest Cold Case Investigators gained attention in Oklahoma. The channel featured 3 retired law enforcement officers who traveled across America's heartland, diving into forgotten missing persons cases with specialized equipment and a dedication that official departments sometimes couldn't maintain after years of dead ends. Their videos, with hundreds of thousands of views, documented their search efforts, interviews with victims' families, and occasionally the sobering discoveries they made. "We're not in this for fame," the group's founder, Ray Blackburn, often said in his videos. "We're here because every family deserves answers, no matter how much time has passed." Their YouTube community had become a powerful network, with viewers often providing tips and information that official channels had missed. In one of their most recent uploads about unsolved Oklahoma disappearances, the comment section erupted with a single name mentioned repeatedly: Jessica Taylor. One comment in particular caught their attention, sent directly to their private inbox: the ravine off Route 177, 2 miles south of the abandoned Wilkinson farm. "There's a dried creek bed that floods during spring storms. That red truck has been there for years." The message was brief, anonymous, and specific in a way that couldn't be ignored. Ray immediately pulled up satellite imagery of the area mentioned. The location was indeed off Route 177, a rural highway connecting Stillwater and Perkins. It featured rough terrain that was largely hidden from the main road by dense trees and undergrowth. The ravine in question appeared to be a natural drainage area that would fill during heavy rains but remain dry most of the year. Most importantly, this area hadn't been mentioned in any of the official search reports from 2011. Somehow, this potential location had been overlooked entirely. Ray called his team together. "We need to head to Oklahoma. If this tip is legitimate, Jessica Taylor might have been lying less than 15 miles from her home for the past decade." The Midwest Cold Case Investigators arrived in Payne County in early July 2021. Their truck loaded with metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, drones with thermal imaging capabilities, and climbing equipment. But before they began searching, they followed proper protocol, contacting Sheriff Nathan Hargrove, who had taken office years after Jessica's disappearance. "Sheriff Hargrove, we're the Midwest Cold Case Investigators. We've received information regarding the 2011 disappearance of Jessica Taylor. We believe her vehicle might be located in a ravine off Route 177. We'd like your permission to coordinate with your department to search this area." Sheriff Hargrove's voice was measured but interested. "The Taylor case has been cold for a decade, but it's never been forgotten here. If you have credible information, I'll gladly authorize a search. But everything must be done by the book. If you find anything, the scene must be preserved." The team promised full cooperation, and Hargrove assigned a deputy to accompany them. When Linda Taylor heard about the new search effort, she collapsed into her husband's arms, whispering, "After all this time, someone's still looking." For 10 years, she had written countless letters, made endless phone calls, and refused to let Jessica's case fade away. Now a group from out of state was bringing renewed hope. The search began on a scorching July morning. The temperature had already climbed above 90 degrees by 8 a.m. as the team's 4-wheel drive vehicle bounced down the rough dirt path leading toward the ravine. Deputy Marshal from the Sheriff's Department followed in his patrol car, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still summer air. Ray Blackburn stood at the edge of the ravine, surveying the terrain. The dried creek bed below was littered with rocks, fallen branches, and years of accumulated debris, washed down during floods. The sides of the ravine were steep, with exposed roots and loose soil, making them treacherous to navigate. This was not a place anyone would find by accident. It was hidden from the road, accessible only if you knew exactly where to look. If someone wanted to hide a vehicle, this would be a perfect spot, Ray commented, his experienced eyes scanning the landscape. During a heavy rain, water would rush through here, potentially covering anything in silt and debris. Over years, vegetation would grow, further concealing what's beneath. The team began their systematic search, first deploying drones to map the entire area and identify potential anomalies. The aerial footage showed several areas of interest where the natural pattern of vegetation was disrupted. Next, they used ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the surface of the creek bed, moving methodically in a grid pattern. Sheriff Hargrove arrived midday, watching from the ridge as the team worked below. The Taylor family waited nearby, holding hands, their faces a mixture of hope and dread. Linda clutched a small photo of Jessica in her palm, as she had done countless times over the years. After hours of searching, one of the team members called out, "Ray! I've got something metallic on the radar, about 3 feet down. It's large, rectangular, consistent with a vehicle." Ray rushed over, examining the radar display. The image showed a distinct shape beneath layers of sediment and plant growth. "Mark the coordinates. We need to verify with multiple scanning methods before we start any excavation." The team brought in their metal detectors, which immediately gave strong readings in the same location. Finally, they used a long metal probe to physically confirm something solid beneath the surface. When the probe struck metal with a dull thud, a hush fell over the ravine. Ray turned to Sheriff Hargrove, who had made his way down to the creek bed. "Sheriff, we believe we've located a submerged vehicle. With your permission, we'd like to begin careful excavation." Hargrove nodded grimly. "Proceed, but with extreme caution. This is now potentially a crime scene." As the team began carefully removing layers of sediment and vegetation, a flash of red paint became visible. Linda Taylor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Michael stood stone still, his weathered face unreadable, but his clenched fists betrayed his tension. The excavation continued with painstaking precision, each shovelful of dirt removed and sifted for potential evidence. As more of the vehicle was revealed, there was no doubt. It was a Ford F-150 pickup truck, its once bright red paint now faded and caked with mud. When enough of the driver's side was exposed, a team member carefully wiped away the grime covering the license plate. OK 235DRV, Jessica's license plate. Sheriff Hargrove immediately called for backup and a forensics team. This is now an active crime scene. No one touches anything further until forensics arrives. The news spread through Payne County like wildfire. Within hours, local news crews had set up at the roadblock established by deputies on Route 177. The headline flashed across television screens throughout Oklahoma. "Vehicle of missing nursing student found after 10 years. For the Taylor family." The discovery brought a complex storm of emotions. There was validation. They had been right all along that something terrible had happened to their daughter. There was relief that after a decade of uncertainty, they were closer to answers. But beneath it all was the devastating realization that the discovery likely meant Jessica was never coming home alive. As darkness fell, powerful lights were set up around the excavation site. The forensics team worked through the night, methodically documenting every detail as the truck was fully unearthed. The vehicle had come to rest on its side, partially crushed from what appeared to be a roll down the steep ravine. All windows were intact, but coated with a decade of grime that made it impossible to see inside. By dawn, a specialized tow truck had arrived to carefully extract the vehicle. As the sun rose over the Oklahoma plains, casting long shadows across the ravine, the red pickup was slowly winched up to level ground. Sheriff Hargrove insisted the truck be transported to a secure facility before being opened to preserve any evidence inside. At the Payne County Forensics Garage, a solemn group gathered: investigators, forensic specialists, Sheriff Hargrove, and the Taylors, who had refused to be anywhere else. The garage was silent, except for the clicking of cameras documenting every step of the process. When the driver's door was finally opened, the interior of the truck told a story of violence. The steering wheel was bent, the dashboard cracked, and most telling, the driver's side window was spattered with what appeared to be dried blood. In the cab, Jessica's purse was found intact, containing her wallet, nursing school ID, and phone. "This was no accident," Sheriff Hargrove said quietly, studying the interior. "The damage pattern suggests the truck was deliberately forced off the road before rolling down into the ravine." Linda Taylor sobbed openly, leaning against her husband for support. Michael's face had turned ashen, his eyes never leaving the truck that had become his daughter's tomb. The most shocking discovery came when forensics opened the truck bed, which had been covered with a tonneau cover. There, wrapped in a tarp, were human remains. Though decomposition was advanced after 10 years, dental records would later confirm what everyone already knew. They had found Jessica Taylor. The medical examiner's preliminary report delivered another bombshell. Jessica had not died from the crash. The cause of death appeared to be a gunshot wound to the head, executed at close range. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore, it was unequivocally murder. As the news broke across Oklahoma, the community that had gradually forgotten about Jessica Taylor was jolted back to awareness. Many expressed shock and guilt that they had allowed her memory to fade while her killer walked free. Others, who had known Jessica, gathered at Oklahoma State University for an impromptu memorial, placing flowers and nursing pins at the Health Sciences building. For investigators, the case had transformed overnight from a cold missing person file to an active homicide investigation. Every piece of evidence from 2011 was re-examined with fresh eyes and modern technology. The forensics team worked around the clock, processing the truck for DNA, fingerprints, and trace evidence that might have survived the decade underground. Sheriff Hargrove held a press conference on the steps of the Payne County Courthouse. "Today, I can confirm that we have recovered the remains of Jessica Taylor, who disappeared in May 2011. This case is now being investigated as a homicide. We are pursuing several leads, and I want to assure the community, and especially the Taylor family, that we will not rest until justice is served." The press conference was broadcast live across the state. Viewers watched as Sheriff Hargrove detailed the discovery of the truck and called for anyone with information to come forward. "Someone out there knows something. Perhaps you've been carrying this secret for 10 years. Now is the time to speak up." As the investigation intensified, forensic technicians made a crucial discovery. Despite a decade of exposure to the elements, several fingerprints were recovered from the truck's exterior, fingerprints that didn't match Jessica's. When run through the national database, they returned a hit: Jacob Merritt, a name that immediately rang bells for the original investigators. Jacob had been 28 in 2011, working as a ranch hand at several properties around Payne County. He had briefly dated Jessica before she ended the relationship, reportedly due to his possessive behavior. When Jessica disappeared, Jacob had been questioned as a matter of routine, but provided an alibi. He claimed to be working a night shift at a ranch outside Perkins, and his employer had confirmed it. With the new evidence linking him directly to Jessica's truck, detectives re-examined Jacob's alibi more critically. They discovered that the ranch owner who had verified Jacob's whereabouts was his uncle, Marshall Merritt. Further investigation revealed that phone records from that night showed Jacob's cell phone pinging towers near the rodeo around the time Jessica was last seen, not out at his uncle's ranch as he had claimed. Sheriff Hargrove ordered a deep dive into Jacob's life in the years following Jessica's disappearance. The picture that emerged was troubling. After 2011, Jacob had moved frequently, drifting between jobs in Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas. He had several arrests for bar fights and a domestic violence charge from a brief relationship in 2015. Currently, he was living in a small apartment in Tulsa, working as a mechanic. Most damning was the testimony of a former co-worker who came forward after seeing the news about Jessica's discovered truck. The man claimed that during a drunken night in 2013, Jacob had made a disturbing comment, "They'll never find her where I put her. That ravine washes out every spring." The accumulating evidence painted a clear picture. Jacob had likely been stalking Jessica after their breakup, followed her from the rodeo that night, and either forced her off the road or convinced her to pull over. After killing her, he concealed her body and the truck in a location he knew would be difficult to find. Sheriff Hargrove presented the evidence to the district attorney, who agreed there was sufficient cause for an arrest warrant. On July 27, 2021, just 3 weeks after the discovery of the truck, officers from the Tulsa Police Department, working in coordination with Payne County deputies, surrounded Jacob Merritt's apartment building. The arrest was conducted in the early morning hours, with officers breaching Jacob's door at 5:30 a.m. They found him asleep, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the bedside table. He appeared stunned as officers handcuffed him, reading him his rights as news cameras captured the moment from the street below. Jacob Merritt, now 38, his face haggard and his eyes wild with panic, was escorted to a waiting police car. As reporters shouted questions, he kept his head down, saying nothing. The man who had eluded justice for a decade was finally in custody, charged with the first-degree murder of Jessica Taylor. When news of the arrest reached the Taylors, Linda collapsed into a chair, overcome with emotion. "They got him," she whispered, clutching Michael's hand. After all this time, they finally got him. The arrest sent shockwaves through Payne County. Many residents remembered Jacob from his days working the local ranches, a quiet man with a quick temper who mostly kept to himself. Some recalled seeing him and Jessica together briefly, but few had suspected he was capable of murder. Former classmates of Jessica's gathered at a local church to process the news, sharing memories and expressing relief that her killer had finally been caught. Kate Wilson, Jessica's former roommate who had since become a nurse practitioner, spoke to local news. Jessica would have saved countless lives as a nurse. Instead, her story is saving others by reminding us never to stop seeking justice, no matter how much time passes. As Jacob was transported back to Payne County and processed into the jail, investigators continued building their case. Forensic technicians found more than just fingerprints on the truck. They recovered partial DNA samples that, when tested, matched Jacob. Cell phone records from 2011, initially overlooked, now painted a disturbing picture of Jacob calling Jessica repeatedly in the weeks before her disappearance. Sheriff Hargrove organized a comprehensive search of Jacob's current residence and previous known addresses. In a storage unit in Oklahoma City, they discovered a box containing items that appeared to belong to Jessica. A turquoise earring matching the set she wore the night she disappeared, pages torn from her nursing school notebook, and most disturbing, several photographs of her taken without her knowledge. The evidence suggested Jacob had been obsessively stalking Jessica for weeks or months before her murder. When confronted with this evidence in interrogation, Jacob maintained his innocence, claiming he was being framed. But his story began to crumble when presented with the cell phone records and DNA evidence. After hours of questioning with his court-appointed attorney present, Jacob's resolve finally broke. In a recorded confession, he admitted to following Jessica from the rodeo that night in May 2011. He described how he had flashed his headlights, pretending to be warning her of a problem with her truck, getting her to pull over on the deserted stretch of Route 177. "She was leaving me for nursing school," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "She thought she was too good for me, that she could just walk away. I couldn't let her go." The confession detailed how he had shot Jessica after an argument, then drove her truck with her body into the ravine, carefully selecting a location he knew would be concealed by the next heavy rain. For 10 years, he had lived with this secret, moving whenever he felt people might be suspicious, drinking heavily to quiet his conscience. The confession was devastating, but provided the closure the Taylor family and the community had sought for a decade. Jacob Merritt was charged with first-degree murder, with additional charges of stalking and evidence tampering. The district attorney announced the state would seek the maximum penalty. As news of Jacob's confession spread, the community that had once allowed Jessica's story to fade rallied around her memory. Oklahoma State University established a nursing scholarship in her name, ensuring that though Jessica would never fulfill her dream of becoming a nurse, she would help others achieve theirs. The Midwest cold case investigators, whose tip had broken the case wide open, published a final video about Jessica's story. In it, Ray Blackburn spoke directly to the camera. "This case reminds us why we do what we do. No matter how much time passes, every victim deserves justice, and every family deserves answers. Jessica has finally been found, and her voice has finally been heard." For the Taylor family, the arrest and confession brought a bittersweet kind of peace. After the initial press conference announcing Jacob's arrest, Linda Taylor addressed the media, her voice steady despite her tears. "For 10 years we've lived in limbo, not knowing where our daughter was or what happened to her. Today, we begin the process of saying goodbye properly. But we also begin the journey toward justice, justice that Jessica has waited far too long to receive." The case that had haunted Payne County for a decade was no longer just a painful memory or a cautionary tale. It had become a powerful reminder that time alone cannot bury the truth, that justice, though delayed, can still be served, and that a community's commitment to remembering the missing can ultimately lead to answers, even when hope seems lost. On a crisp autumn morning in September 2021, the Payne County Courthouse stood imposing against a clear Oklahoma sky. The building, with its century-old stone facade, had witnessed countless trials, but few had drawn the attention now focused on Courtroom 3, where Jacob Merritt would face justice for the murder of Jessica Taylor. The trial that the community had waited a decade for was finally beginning. Outside, news vans lined the street. Reporters from Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and even national outlets set up cameras on the courthouse steps. The case had captured widespread attention. A young nursing student murdered, her truck hidden in a ravine for 10 years, and her killer finally facing justice through the persistence of her family and a group of retired investigators. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. The Taylor family occupied the front row, Linda and Michael sitting shoulder to shoulder, their hands clasped tightly. Behind them sat Jessica's friends, former classmates and nursing school instructors. Kate Wilson, now wearing the scrubs of a practicing nurse, pinned a turquoise ribbon to her lapel, as she had done every day since her friend's disappearance. On the opposite side of the aisle, the seats behind the defense table were mostly empty. Jacob Merritt had few supporters in Payne County. His parents had moved away years ago, and his uncle Marshall, who had provided his false alibi, was now facing charges of his own for obstruction of justice. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Samuel Whitman." Judge Whitman, a silver-haired veteran of the bench known for his strict adherence to procedure, took his seat and addressed the packed courtroom. "This court is now in session. The state of Oklahoma versus Jacob Merritt on the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Jessica Taylor." Jacob Merritt sat beside his public defender, his posture slumped, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. Gone was the defiance he had shown during his arrest. After a month in county jail awaiting trial, he appeared thinner, his face gaunt, his shoulders hunched beneath the weight of his crime finally coming to light. District Attorney Eleanor Matthews approached the podium for her opening statement. A seasoned prosecutor with 20 years of experience, she had personally taken on the case, determined to secure justice for Jessica and her family. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. 10 years ago, a promising young woman with dreams of becoming a nurse, vanished from our community. For a decade, her family lived in agonizing uncertainty. For a decade, her killer walked free among us. Matthews methodically outlined the state's case, describing how Jacob had stalked Jessica after their breakup, followed her from the rodeo that fateful night, lured her to pull over on a deserted stretch of road, and murdered her in cold blood. She detailed how he had carefully concealed the truck in a remote ravine, choosing a location he knew would be difficult to find and would be further obscured by seasonal flooding. The evidence will show that this was not a crime of passion, but a calculated act by a man who could not accept rejection, Matthews concluded. Jessica Taylor's only crime was wanting to pursue her education and end a relationship with a man who saw her as a possession rather than a person. For that, the defendant took her life and stole 10 years of closure from her family. When the defense attorney rose for his opening statement, his task was clearly difficult. The evidence against Jacob was substantial, and his confession, though he had later attempted to retract it, had been properly obtained with his attorney present. "Ladies and gentlemen," the defense attorney began, "the state has painted a picture of premeditation and calculation. But we ask you to consider the full context of that night in May 2011. Jacob Merritt was a young man struggling with emotional issues and substance abuse. While we do not dispute that a terrible tragedy occurred, we ask you to consider whether this meets the legal definition of first-degree murder, which requires premeditation." It was a weak opening, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The defense's strategy appeared to be aimed not at acquittal, but at reducing the charge to second-degree murder to avoid the maximum sentence. As the trial proceeded, the prosecution called a series of witnesses who methodically built their case. The medical examiner testified about Jessica's cause of death, a single gunshot wound to the head, execution style. Forensic experts presented DNA evidence linking Jacob to both the truck and Jessica's body. Cell phone records demonstrated how Jacob had tracked Jessica's movements in the weeks leading up to her murder. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Kate Wilson, Jessica's roommate. She described the controlling behavior she had observed during Jessica and Jacob's relationship. Jessica would get these texts demanding to know where she was, who she was with. If she didn't answer right away, he would call repeatedly, Kate testified, her voice steady despite her evident emotion. After she broke up with him, she mentioned seeing his truck parked outside our apartment complex several times. She was starting to get scared. Throughout the prosecution's case, Jacob sat motionless, his gaze downcast. Only occasionally would he glance up, particularly when photographs of Jessica were shown. During these moments, Linda Taylor would stare directly at him, her eyes never wavering, as if demanding he acknowledge the life he had taken. On the third day of the trial, the prosecution played the recording of Jacob's confession. The courtroom fell completely silent as his voice filled the room, describing in detached tones how he had followed Jessica, convinced her to pull over, argued with her, and then, in his words, ended it when she refused to reconsider their relationship. Linda Taylor wept silently as the recording played, her husband's arm around her shoulders. Several jurors wiped away tears, while others stared at Jacob with undisguised contempt. When the defense finally presented their case, it was brief and focused primarily on Jacob's mental state. A psychologist testified about his history of abandonment issues stemming from childhood trauma. His former employer spoke about his work ethic, attempting to humanize him for the jury. But none of these testimonies could counter the weight of evidence against him or the coldness with which he had described his crime. Jacob himself did not take the stand. His attorney had advised against it, knowing that cross-examination would likely only reinforce the prosecution's narrative of a calculating killer rather than a man who had acted in the heat of passion. After 5 days of testimony, closing arguments began. District Attorney Matthews stood before the jury one final time. When Jessica Taylor left that rodeo 10 years ago, she had no idea that she was driving toward her death. She had no idea that the man she had once trusted had decided that if he couldn't have her, no one would. This was not a split-second decision. This was not a crime of passion. Jacob Merritt followed her. He had a gun. He forced her off the road. He shot her at point-blank range. And then he spent 10 years living his life while Jessica's family searched for answers. Matthews turned to look directly at Jacob. The evidence is overwhelming. The defendant's own words convict him. Justice has been delayed for a decade. Please do not allow it to be denied any longer. The defense made their final plea, asking the jury to consider a lesser charge of second-degree murder, arguing that Jacob had not planned the killing in advance, but had acted in an emotional state. But their argument seemed hollow against the mountain of evidence, suggesting premeditation. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Most legal observers expected a quick verdict, given the strength of the prosecution's case. But hours passed, with no word from the jury room. 1 hour became 2, then 3, then 4. Finally, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the courtroom windows, the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict. They filed back in, their faces solemn. The foreman handed the verdict form to the judge, who reviewed it before returning it. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" Judge Whitman asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied. "On the sole count of the indictment, murder in the first degree, how do you find?" "We find the defendant, Jacob Merritt, guilty." A collective release of breath swept through the courtroom. Linda Taylor collapsed against her husband, sobbing in relief. Kate Wilson closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Jessica's former nursing instructors held hands, nodding in silent affirmation. Jacob showed no reaction to the verdict. He sat motionless, staring straight ahead, as if he had expected nothing else. Judge Whitman scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, thanked the jury for their service, and adjourned the court. As Jacob was led away in handcuffs, he finally looked up, his eyes meeting Linda Taylor's across the courtroom. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a flicker of remorse, perhaps, though whether it was for Jessica's death or merely for being caught, no one could say. Outside the courthouse, the Taylors faced a sea of reporters and cameras. Michael, who had rarely spoken publicly throughout the ordeal, stepped forward. "Today, justice was served for our daughter, Jessica," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "No verdict can bring her back to us, but knowing that the man who took her will spend the rest of his life in prison brings a measure of peace. We want to thank the Sheriff's Department, the District Attorney, and especially the Midwest cold case investigators, without whom we might never have found Jessica or her killer." Linda, standing beside him, added, "For 10 years, we have lived with not knowing." That uncertainty was its own kind of prison. "Today, we begin the process of truly saying goodbye to our daughter, but we will never stop remembering her or the light she brought to this world." The case that had haunted Payne County for a decade had finally reached its conclusion in the eyes of the law. But for those who had loved Jessica, the impact of her life and death would continue to resonate. 2 weeks later, at the sentencing hearing, the courtroom was once again filled to capacity. Judge Whitman, known for his measured approach, listened as both the prosecution and defense made their final arguments regarding Jacob's sentence. District Attorney Matthews advocated for the maximum penalty, life without the possibility of parole. Jessica Taylor's life was cut short at 23. She never had the chance to become a nurse, to marry, to have children, to fulfill any of her dreams. The defendant not only took her life, but concealed his crime for a decade, allowing her family to suffer the torment of uncertainty. The defense attorney requested leniency, pointing to Jacob's confession and arguing that he had shown remorse. Few in the courtroom found this argument convincing, particularly given how long he had concealed his crime. Before pronouncing the sentence, Judge Whitman allowed victim impact statements. Linda Taylor approached the podium, carrying a framed photograph of Jessica at her nursing school orientation. "Your Honor, I want to tell you about my daughter," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. Jessica was more than a victim. She was a young woman who worked 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. She volunteered at the Children's Hospital in Oklahoma City every Saturday. She called her grandmother every Sunday without fail. Linda held up the photograph. "This is who Jacob Merritt took from us. Not just our daughter, but a future nurse who would have helped countless patients. A friend who would have stood by others in their darkest hours. A woman who loved horses and country music and chocolate ice cream and thunderstorms." She turned slightly, addressing Jacob directly for the first time. "For 10 years, I've wondered what Jessica's final moments were like. Were you kind to her at the end? Did she know what was coming? Did she beg for her life? These questions have haunted me night after night. You didn't just kill Jessica that night. You killed a piece of everyone who loved her." Linda's composure finally broke, tears streaming down her face. "I don't hate you, Jacob. Hate would only destroy what's left of me. But I will never forgive you for what you took from us, from the world." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom as Linda returned to her seat. Michael wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as she finally released the grief she had held so tightly controlled throughout the trial. Judge Whitman took a moment to compose himself before addressing the court. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have presided over many difficult cases, but few have affected me as deeply as this one. The calculated nature of this crime, the deliberate concealment of evidence, and the decade of suffering inflicted on the victim's family demand the fullest measure of justice this court can provide." He turned to face Jacob. "Jacob Merritt, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. You will serve your sentence at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. May you use your time to reflect on the life you took and the pain you caused." As Jacob was led from the courtroom for the final time, a chapter closed in Payne County's history. The mystery that had haunted the community for a decade had been solved, the perpetrator brought to justice, and Jessica Taylor's memory honored. In the days following the sentencing, the community came together in ways that transcended the tragedy. Oklahoma State University held a formal dedication ceremony for the Jessica Taylor Memorial Scholarship in Nursing. The endowment, started with donations from community members and boosted by a substantial contribution from an anonymous donor, would provide full tuition for a nursing student who demonstrated the same commitment to compassionate care that Jessica had embodied. At the dedication, Dean of Nursing Dr. Margaret Collins addressed the gathered crowd. Jessica Taylor never had the chance to complete her nursing education or care for patients, but through this scholarship, her spirit of healing will touch countless lives in the years to come. Future nurses will carry her legacy forward, perhaps never knowing her name, but embodying the same dedication and compassion that made Jessica so special. Linda and Michael Taylor sat in places of honor at the ceremony, surrounded by Jessica's friends and former classmates. For the first time in 10 years, Linda's smile reached her eyes as she watched the first scholarship recipient, a young woman from rural Oklahoma with dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse, accept the award. The case also sparked broader changes in how missing persons cases were handled in Oklahoma. Sheriff Hargrove worked with state legislators to establish Jessica's Protocol, a comprehensive set of guidelines for investigating disappearances. The protocol emphasized immediate action, coordination between jurisdictions, and the use of social media and technology to aid in searches. If these procedures had been in place in 2011, we might have found Jessica much sooner, Sheriff Hargrove explained at a press conference announcing the new guidelines. "We can't change the past, but we can ensure that other families don't have to endure what the Taylors did." The Midwest Cold Case investigators saw their YouTube channel subscriber count soar after Jessica's case, bringing new attention to other unsolved disappearances across America's heartland. Ray Blackburn used this platform to advocate for better funding for cold case units in rural counties and to connect families of missing persons with resources and support networks. Jessica's case reminds us that no matter how much time passes, there is always hope for answers, Ray said in a video that garnered millions of views. To the families still waiting and wondering, we want you to know that you are not alone and that your loved ones are not forgotten. For Kate Wilson, Jessica's case inspired a new direction in her nursing career. She specialized in trauma nursing and became an advocate for victims of domestic violence, speaking at conferences and nursing schools about recognizing the warning signs of controlling relationships. "I saw the red flags in Jacob's behavior, but I didn't fully understand what they meant until it was too late," she explained during one presentation. "If I can help one nurse identify a patient in danger, or one student recognize concerning patterns in their own relationship, then Jessica's story will have saved a life." 6 months after the trial, on what would have been Jessica's 34th birthday, the Taylors finally held a proper funeral service. The small church in Stillwater overflowed with people whose lives Jessica had touched: childhood friends, nursing school classmates, professors, and community members who had searched for her a decade earlier. The service was a celebration of Jessica's life rather than a mourning of her death. Photographs from throughout her life lined the walls. Jessica riding her first horse, graduating high school, smiling in her nursing scrubs during her first clinical rotation. Friends shared stories of her kindness, her determination, and her quirky sense of humor. Linda Taylor, standing before the assembled mourners, spoke with a peace that had been absent during the trial. "For 10 years we lived in limbo, unable to properly grieve because we didn't know what had happened to our daughter. Today, we finally laid Jessica to rest, but we also celebrate the incredible young woman she was and the lives she touched in her brief time with us." After the service, the Taylors led a procession to a quiet corner of the Stillwater Cemetery where a simple headstone had been placed. It bore Jessica's name, her dates, and the words, "Beloved daughter, friend, and healer, her light shines on." As the guests departed, Linda and Michael remained by the grave, finally able to say a proper goodbye to their daughter. Michael placed his hand on the headstone, his weathered farmer's fingers tracing the letters of Jessica's name. "We found you, sweetheart," he whispered. "We never gave up." Linda, standing beside him, looked up at the Oklahoma sky, where clouds were gathering for an evening thunderstorm, the kind Jessica had always loved. "She knows," Linda said softly. "Wherever she is, she knows we never stopped looking." The story of Jessica Taylor, once a painful mystery that haunted Payne County, had transformed into a legacy of perseverance, justice, and healing. Her case had changed how missing persons were searched for, how nursing students were educated about domestic violence, and how a community came together to support a family through unimaginable loss. 1 year after Jacob's sentencing, the Taylors invited the community to join them at Miller's Lake for the dedication of a memorial bench overlooking the water. The location, once associated only with tragedy, was being reclaimed as a place of reflection and remembrance. The simple wooden bench bore a small plaque in memory of Jessica Taylor and all those still missing. "May those who seek find answers, and those who wait find peace." As sunset painted the Oklahoma sky in shades of pink and gold, Linda Taylor stood before the gathered crowd. "A wise person once told me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding a way to carry our grief while still embracing life. Jessica would want us to live fully, to help others, and to find joy even after tragedy. That is how we honor her memory." The case that had once seemed destined to remain an unsolved mystery had ultimately become a powerful reminder of the importance of persistence, the strength of community, and the enduring impact of a single life. Jessica Taylor's story would continue to inspire and educate long after the headlines faded, proving that even the coldest cases can find resolution, and that justice, though delayed, need not be denied. In law enforcement academies across Oklahoma, Jessica's case is now taught as an example of how determination and advancing technology can solve even the most challenging cold cases. For families still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones, her story offers a beacon of hope that truth can emerge even after years of darkness. And in Stillwater, where a young nursing student once dreamed of a future she would never see, her legacy lives on in the lives she continues to touch through scholarships awarded in her name, through protocols that help find the missing, and through a community forever changed by her story. On a warm spring evening in 2023, almost 2 years after Jacob Merritt's conviction, Ray Blackburn of the Midwest Cold Case Investigators stood before a packed auditorium at Oklahoma State University. The event, titled Cold Cases, Warm Hearts, The Legacy of Jessica Taylor, had drawn hundreds from across the state. Families of missing persons sat in the front rows, many clutching photographs of loved ones still unaccounted for. "The Jessica Taylor case changed everything for us," Ray began, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "It showed us that no matter how much time passes, justice can still prevail. But more importantly, it revealed the extraordinary power of community and perseverance." Behind him, a slideshow displayed photographs of Jessica, her high school graduation, her first day of nursing school, her bright smile captured in countless moments, now preserved only in images. The final slide showed the memorial bench at Miller's Lake, now surrounded by flowering bushes, planted by nursing students in her honor. Since Jessica's case was solved, our team has received over 500 tips about other cold cases across America. Because of her story, 12 more families have found answers. 12 more missing persons have been brought home. This is the ripple effect of justice. One case solved creates momentum that helps solve others. In the audience, Linda and Michael Taylor listened intently, their hands clasped together. 2 years had softened the sharp edges of their grief, transforming it into a quiet determination to help others. They had established the Jessica Taylor Foundation, which provided resources for families of missing persons and advocated for improved investigation protocols nationwide. After the presentation, a reception was held in the nursing school building, where Jessica's photograph now hung in the Hall of Inspiration alongside other alumni who had made significant contributions to healthcare. Linda stood beneath her daughter's portrait, speaking with a young woman whose sister had disappeared 3 years earlier. "The hardest part is not knowing," the woman confided, tears welling in her eyes. "Sometimes I think it would be easier if I knew she was gone, rather than living in this constant state of hope and despair." Linda nodded, taking the woman's hands in hers. "I understand that limbo better than most. For 10 years, I woke up every morning wondering if today would be the day we found Jessica. What I can tell you is this: never stop searching, but also never stop living. Your sister would want that for you." These conversations had become a regular part of Linda's life. She had emerged as a beacon for families navigating the complicated grief of having a missing loved one. Her empathy, forged in the crucible of her own decade-long ordeal, provided comfort that few others could offer. Michael, meanwhile, had channeled his energy into legislative advocacy. Working with State Senator Rebecca Lawson, he had helped draft the Jessica Taylor Act, which mandated dedicated funding for cold case units in every county and established a statewide database for missing persons cases. The bill was currently making its way through the Oklahoma legislature with bipartisan support. Jessica's story resonates across political lines, Senator Lawson explained to reporters after a committee hearing. "This isn't about politics. It's about ensuring that no family has to wait 10 years for answers like the Taylors did." The case had sparked changes beyond Oklahoma as well. Law enforcement agencies across the Midwest had adopted similar protocols, creating a regional network dedicated to solving cold cases. The Midwest Cold Case Investigators had expanded, training retired officers in 5 states to form their own volunteer search teams. Ray Blackburn had become a respected voice in the field, consulting with police departments and appearing on national news programs to discuss advances in cold case methodologies. His YouTube channel now had over 2 million subscribers, many of whom actively contributed to investigations by analyzing satellite imagery, reviewing old news reports, or providing local knowledge about areas being searched. "We've created a citizen detective movement," Ray explained during an interview with a major news network. "Not vigilantes, but concerned citizens working in coordination with law enforcement." The Jessica Taylor case proved that sometimes all it takes is one person with the right information to break a case wide open. Sheriff Nathan Hargrove had also risen to prominence, becoming president of the National Rural Law Enforcement Association. He traveled the country, teaching workshops on cold case investigation techniques specifically designed for departments with limited resources. "In rural counties, we don't have the manpower or budget of big city departments," Hargrove explained during one such workshop in Montana. But the Jessica Taylor case taught us that persistence and community engagement can overcome those limitations. We just need to be smart about how we allocate our resources. Back at the Oklahoma State prison system, Jacob Merritt's life had taken a different turn. Initially placed in protective custody due to the high-profile nature of his case, he had eventually been transferred to the general population. He kept to himself, working in the prison library and rarely speaking about his crime. Prison psychologists noted that Jacob appeared to be genuinely processing the magnitude of what he had done. He had declined all interview requests from journalists and true crime podcasters, instead writing a single letter to the Taylors 6 months after his sentencing. Linda had debated whether to read it, eventually deciding that any insight into Jacob's mind might help her find closure. The letter, while brief, contained something she hadn't expected. Not excuses or pleas for forgiveness, but a simple acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. "I have no right to ask your forgiveness," Jacob had written. "What I took from you cannot be restored. But I want you to know that not a day passes when I don't think about Jessica and the life she should have had. The person I was then was consumed by selfishness. I can't undo what I did, but I live with the weight of it every day." Linda had shared the letter with her support group for families of victims, where opinions were divided on whether such communications offered healing or merely reopened wounds. For Linda, the letter provided a small measure of peace, not because she forgave Jacob, but because it confirmed that Jessica's memory would haunt him just as her absence had haunted the Taylors. 3 years after Jessica's remains were discovered, Kate Wilson completed her doctoral degree in nursing with a focus on trauma-informed care. Her dissertation, dedicated to Jessica's memory, examined how healthcare providers could better recognize and respond to signs of domestic violence and stalking. Jessica's story might have been different if someone had recognized the warning signs in Jacob's behavior, Kate explained during her dissertation defense. "As healthcare providers, we are uniquely positioned to identify these patterns and intervene before tragedy strikes." Upon completing her doctorate, Kate accepted a position as director of the newly established Taylor Center for Trauma Recovery at Oklahoma State University's Medical Center. The center, funded partly by the Jessica Taylor Foundation, provided comprehensive care for survivors of violence while training nursing students to recognize and respond to abuse. At the center's opening ceremony, Kate unveiled a mosaic in the main lobby, thousands of turquoise tiles forming an image of a phoenix rising from ashes. Embedded within the artwork were nursing pins donated by hundreds of nurses across the country, symbolizing the healing profession Jessica had aspired to join. "Jessica never had the chance to wear her nursing pin," Kate said during the dedication. "But her spirit is present in every nurse who dedicates themselves to healing and protection. This center ensures that her dream of helping others lives on." The ripple effects of Jessica's case continued to spread in unexpected ways. A popular crime podcast produced a 6-part series about her disappearance and the decade-long search for answers. The series, which emphasized the investigative breakthroughs rather than sensationalizing the crime itself, won several awards and was adapted into a documentary that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. Linda Taylor initially hesitated about participating in the documentary, concerned about how Jessica would be portrayed. After meeting with the filmmakers and reviewing their approach, she agreed to be interviewed, seeing it as an opportunity to humanize her daughter beyond the missing girl headlines. "I wanted people to know who Jessica really was," Linda explained during a panel discussion following the documentary's premiere. "Not just how she died, but how she lived, her compassion, her determination, her dreams. If her story helps save even one life by raising awareness about stalking and relationship violence, then sharing it is worth the pain of reliving those memories." The documentary, titled Decade of Silence, was viewed by millions and used as a training tool in law enforcement academies nationwide. It focused not only on Jessica's case, but on the broader issues surrounding missing persons investigations and the challenges faced by rural departments with limited resources. 4 years after Jacob's conviction, the Taylors received unexpected news. Marshall Merritt, Jacob's uncle who had provided the false alibi, had been diagnosed with terminal cancer while serving his 3-year sentence for obstruction of justice. Facing his own mortality, Marshall requested a meeting with the Taylors before his release on compassionate grounds. After much deliberation, Linda and Michael agreed to the meeting, hoping it might provide additional closure. In the small conference room at the prison hospital, they came face to face with the man who had helped conceal their daughter's murder for a decade. Marshall, now frail and gaunt from his illness, could barely meet their eyes. "I've wanted to speak with you for years," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not to ask forgiveness, I don't deserve that, but to tell you what I should have said 10 years ago." He explained how Jacob had arrived at his ranch in the early morning hours after the murder, distraught and covered in dirt. "He told me he'd done something terrible, that he needed an alibi. I convinced myself it was just another of his bar fights or maybe some vandalism. I told myself I was protecting my sister's son." Tears streamed down Marshall's weathered face. "When Jessica was reported missing, I realized what must have happened. But by then, I'd already given a statement to police. I was a coward. Every time I saw your faces on the news, searching for your daughter, I knew I was failing not just you, but my own conscience." Linda listened silently, her expression unreadable. When Marshall finished speaking, she asked the one question that had haunted her for years. Did Jacob ever express remorse? "Not now, but then when it happened." Marshall nodded slowly. "He cried for nights afterward. Said he didn't mean for it to go so far, but then he just shut down. Started talking about how no one would find her, how he'd chosen the spot carefully. That's when I should have gone to the police. The moment haunts me every day." After the meeting, as they drove home along the familiar Oklahoma highways, Michael asked Linda if the conversation had helped. "I don't know if helped is the right word," she replied, watching the landscape roll past the window. "But it filled in a piece of the puzzle. All these years, I've wondered if Jacob immediately knew the magnitude of what he'd done, or if he just didn't care. Now I know he understood, and he chose to hide it anyway. And Marshall understood, and made the same choice." She turned to her husband, her expression resolute. "That's why our work with the foundation matters so much. We're not just helping find the missing, we're trying to create a world where people choose courage over cowardice, where they speak up instead of staying silent." 5 years after Jessica's remains were found, the first recipient of the Jessica Taylor Nursing Scholarship graduated with honors. Megan Reeves, a young woman from a small town much like Jessica's, had overcome significant obstacles to complete her education. Like Jessica, she had worked multiple jobs while attending classes, driven by a passion for helping others. At the pinning ceremony, a tradition where new nurses receive the pin, symbolizing their entry into the profession, Linda Taylor was invited to present Megan with her pin. The auditorium fell silent as Linda stepped forward, holding the small gold pin that represented everything Jessica had worked toward but never achieved. In nursing tradition, this pin symbolizes not just completion of education, but entrance into a sacred trust, Linda said, her voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. "Patients will place their lives and well-being in your hands. just as Jessica would have done had she been given the chance to stand where you are today. As she pinned the symbol to Megan's white uniform, Linda continued, "When you care for patients in their most vulnerable moments, when you advocate for those who cannot speak for themselves, when you notice the warning signs that others might miss, you carry forward the legacy of a young woman who never had the chance to fulfill her calling." Megan, tears streaming down her face, embraced Linda. "I promise to make her proud," she whispered. The moment was captured by local news cameras and quickly went viral, touching hearts across the country. Applications to nursing programs spiked in the following months, with many applicants citing Jessica's story as their inspiration. The nursing profession, already focused on advocacy and protection, embraced Jessica's legacy as a powerful reminder of their role in identifying and preventing relationship violence. 6 years after the discovery of Jessica's remains, the Taylors faced a bittersweet milestone. She had now been gone from their lives longer than she had been in them. On this anniversary, they chose to do something different. Rather than holding another memorial service, they organized a community celebration of life at the Payne County Fairgrounds, where Jessica had last been seen alive. The event, called Living for Jessica, featured booths from organizations working to prevent domestic violence, resources for families of missing persons, and information about the nursing profession. Nursing students offered free health screenings, while law enforcement provided safety information and self-defense demonstrations. "We wanted to transform a place of tragedy into a space of hope and empowerment," Linda explained to a local reporter. Jessica would have wanted her story to help others, not just to be remembered as a victim. The centerpiece of the event was the unveiling of a permanent memorial at the fairgrounds entrance, a life-sized bronze statue of a young woman in nursing scrubs, her hand extended in a gesture of care and compassion. The plaque beneath it read, "In memory of Jessica Taylor, 1988-2011, and all victims of relationship violence. May their stories inspire protection, healing, and justice." As the statue was revealed, hundreds of nursing students and professionals from across the state released turquoise balloons into the clear Oklahoma sky. The image, turquoise symbols of hope rising above the place where Jessica's journey had ended, became an iconic photograph that appeared in nursing textbooks and advocacy materials nationwide. Sheriff Hargrove, now in his second term, spoke at the dedication. "6 years ago, when we found Jessica's truck in that ravine, I made a promise to the Taylor family that we would never again let a missing person case go cold for lack of resources or attention. Today, I'm proud to say that since implementing Jessica's protocol, our clearance rate for missing persons cases has risen from 65% to 97%. That means dozens of families have received answers instead of enduring years of uncertainty." The success of Jessica's protocol had drawn attention from law enforcement agencies across the country. What had begun as a local response to a tragedy had evolved into a national model for missing persons investigations, particularly in rural areas where resources were limited and terrain could make searches challenging. 7 years after Jessica's case was resolved, Ray Blackburn published a book titled Cold Cases, Warm Hearts: How One Community's Persistence Solved a Decade-Old Mystery. The book detailed not just the investigative techniques that led to finding Jessica's truck, but the broader impact her case had on cold case investigations nationwide. "The true legacy of the Jessica Taylor case isn't just that we found her and brought her killer to justice," Ray wrote in the book's conclusion. "It's that her story awakened something in people, a recognition that every missing person is someone's child, someone's friend, someone's classmate. And that recognition has fueled a movement of citizen involvement that's changing how we approach cold cases across America." The book became a bestseller, with proceeds benefiting the Jessica Taylor Foundation. Its publication coincided with the announcement that the Oklahoma legislature had unanimously passed the Jessica Taylor Act, establishing permanent funding for cold case units in every county and creating a specialized state-level task force dedicated to missing persons cases. At the bill signing ceremony, Governor Martinez acknowledged the Taylors' advocacy. This legislation ensures that no family will have to fight for 10 years to find their loved one. Linda and Michael Taylor have transformed their personal tragedy into a legacy of justice that will benefit Oklahomans for generations to come. As the years continued to pass, Jessica's story remained a powerful reminder of both the darkest and brightest aspects of humanity, how one person's violence could end a promising life, but also how a community's persistence could ensure that justice, though delayed, would not be denied. Her case was studied in criminal justice programs, discussed in nursing ethics courses, and referenced in domestic violence prevention training. 10 years after Jessica's remains were discovered, on what would have been her 44th birthday, the Taylor Center for Trauma Recovery held a conference titled A Decade of Healing: Progress and Challenges in Trauma-Informed Care. Healthcare professionals from across the country gathered to discuss advances in recognizing and responding to relationship violence, with many crediting Jessica's story as a turning point in their understanding of the issue. Kate Wilson, now a nationally recognized expert in trauma-informed nursing, delivered the keynote address. 10 years ago, we made a promise to honor Jessica's memory by creating better systems to protect those at risk. Today, I can report that nursing programs nationwide now include comprehensive training on recognizing signs of abuse and stalking. Emergency departments have implemented screening protocols that have identified thousands of individuals in danger. And perhaps most importantly, we've shifted the conversation from "why doesn't she leave?" to "how can we help?" After the conference, Kate joined the Taylors for a private moment at Jessica's grave. The simple headstone, now weathered by a decade of Oklahoma seasons, stood amid flowering shrubs planted by nursing students over the years. "I still talk to her sometimes," Kate admitted, placing a fresh turquoise ribbon at the base of the stone. "When I'm facing a difficult case or developing a new training program, I ask myself what Jessica would do. She had such natural empathy, such a gift for making people feel safe." Linda smiled, her hand resting lightly on the sun-warmed stone. "I do the same thing, especially when I'm speaking with families who are going through what we did. Jessica guides me, helps me find the right words to offer comfort without false hope." Michael, who had remained the quieter partner in their advocacy work, spoke up. 10 years ago, when they found her truck, I thought that would be the end of the story. I never imagined Jessica would continue to make such a difference in the world." As they stood together in the peaceful cemetery, the three people who had perhaps been most transformed by Jessica's case reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the agonizing uncertainty of her disappearance to the shocking discovery of her remains, from the painful trial to the healing that had gradually emerged from their collective grief, Jessica's story had evolved from a tragedy into a catalyst for change. "The most important thing I've learned," Linda said softly, "is that love doesn't end with death. It transforms. The love I have for Jessica now powers everything I do to help others. And in that way, she's still very much alive." As the sun began to set over the Oklahoma prairie, casting long shadows across the cemetery, they walked together toward the future that Jessica had helped shape. A future where missing persons were found more quickly, where potential victims were identified before tragedy struck, and where the ripples of one young woman's life continued to spread outward, touching lives she would never know, but who would forever know her story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.